Imagine waking up tomorrow and your dollars don't work anymore. Your savings are gone. Your mortgage payment tripled overnight. The grocery store won't even take your dollars. It wants gold or crypto. Sounds insane, right? But it's actually happened before. Dozens of times, actually. Germany, Argentina, Zimbabwe, even Russia. And the question isn't if it could happen here. The question is when. And what happens to your real estate when the dollar fails? Now, look, before I go any further, I'm not making this video for you to feel like all of a sudden tomorrow you have to trade all of your cash in for gold or any kind of hard money for that matter. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting, though, is that the time frame that it's taken for both the Canadian and US dollar to lose the value that it has is accelerating. And this problem will likely be your problem in your lifetime. Since 1970, the dollar has lost nearly 90% of its purchasing power. Your house didn't get more valuable, your money just got weaker. And the same policies that caused historic currency collapses are being repeated right now. But here's the question that really matters. What happens to real estate when the dollar collapses? Does it soar like gold, a hedge against inflation? Or does it crash as the debt becomes unsurmountable to pay? Because right now, governments around the world are doing the very thing that have caused currency collapses in the past. They're printing, they're deficit spending, they're borrowing far beyond what could ever be repaid. And if you think it can't happen here, remember, no empire ever believed it would happen to them until it did. Let's look at the mechanics of collapse. It starts in the markets, the complacency stage. I think maybe where we are today. Bond yields creep as investors demand more to hold government debt. Central banks dismiss it as temporary. And meanwhile, prices for everyday goods continue to tick higher. 5% inflation turns into 8, 9, 10. Then salaries don't seem to keep up. In Weimar Germany, as an example, in 1921, it began just like this. Government printing to cover the deficits while telling citizens it's temporary. Prices doubled every few days. Rent was collected twice a day. To pay war debts, the reparation payments, Germany had printed paper marks until they were worth less than the actual paper they were printed on. Then phase 2 begins. And this is a confidence crisis. Next comes the loss of faith in the bonds. Foreign investors sell first, then locals follow. Currency values slide on foreign exchange markets and import costs explode. In the 1970s in the US, when foreign holders of dollars demanded gold instead of paper, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar fell 30% in just months. As the currency drops, the governments raise rates to defend it. That kills the credit market, and mortgages vanish. Construction stops, asset values whipsaw. You end up then with a liquidity squeeze. Banks face a crisis of confidence. People line up to withdraw their cash. Banks limit the withdrawal size to stabilize the system, to slow you down from taking your money out. In Russia, as an example, in 1998, the ruble lost 2/3 of its value in just a week. Apartments traded for food and cigarettes. Those who owned houses outright survived the hyperinflation because the rent replaced their salary. ATMs were emptied, stores repriced daily, and foreign capital fled overnight. Corporations stopped trusting the currency as well. They price contracts now in US dollars, euros, even Bitcoin or other cryptos. That's the moment a currency loses its network effect. Phase 4 is a flight to hard assets. Once the trust is broken, smart money will run first. Investors buy land, metals, energy, foreign stocks, and the middle class follows, though usually they're too late. In Argentina in 2001, capital controls froze bank accounts. People bought apartments in USD cash because banks were locked. In Zimbabwe in 2008, gold and livestock replaced money overnight. One cow was worth $1 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. Real estate prices soared in nominal terms, but Transactions freeze. Sellers don't trust the money because buyers can't get their loans. Then we hit phase 5, and this is the social spiral where wages lag, savings evaporate, people hoard food, fuel, and foreign currency. Protests begin to erupt, and governments blame speculators. Everybody starts pointing fingers. The final act is always political. Hyperinflation will collapse any government and births new ones with reformed currencies. Each reset erased debts and savings alike and rewarded those holding tangible assets when the music stopped, i.e., your real estate. The modern parallel here is that if the Canadian or the US dollar ever entered this spiral, the early signs would look very similar to what I just talked about, arguably making the value of land completely unattainable for most people. And this is largely how a currency dies. Printing money today doesn't mean rolling out physical bills either. It means crediting digital accounts. Trillions are added to the monetary system by way of keystroke. The money has no proof of work. And that's what happened during the pandemic. In just 18 months, the US printed nearly 40% of all dollars into existence. Canada wasn't far behind. Its money supply ballooned by 28% over that very same period. And if you look closely at home prices, you'll see they increased by a very similar amount. So the question is, did the home go up in value, or did your dollar lose 28% of its purchasing power? When you create money faster than you create goods and services, prices are forced to rise. You have more and more money chasing fewer and fewer goods and services. Therefore, whoever has more of them gets them. That's inflation. It's not caused by greed or luck, but by dilution of currency. Every new dollar makes every existing one worth less. To put it bluntly, though, your dollars have been losing value. Well, to be honest, they've been collapsing in value for decades. In 1970, one US dollar could buy what costs you now $8.40. And in Canada, $1 in 1970 now buys you 13 cents worth of goods and services. 13 cents. And that's before you factor in current deficits, bailouts that have happened, stimulus spending, all of which is continuing today at unbelievable levels. This is the same pattern we've seen throughout history. Let's take a brief look at history so we can peer into what the future might be like. Those who owned hard assets, land, factories, even livestock, at least they were able to keep something real, something of value. Savers that kept it all in cash lost everything. They were completely wiped out. And the outcome? Well, those who owned property survived, but largely the entire middle class was wiped out, and political extremism filled the void. We don't quite have that today, but we definitely have the makings of it. Let's move to Argentina in 2001 all the way till present day today. They went through endless money printing to fund subsidies, and that drove inflation above 100% in 2023. Homes are still bought, but they're now bought in US dollars, not in pesos. What was the outcome for real estate, though? Well, property values in local currency soared by 10,000%, yet real wages collapsed by 70%. Owning land preserved that wealth, and holding cash completely destroyed it. If we move over to post-Soviet Russia in the 1990s, when the ruble collapsed after the USSR fell, apartments traded for food and cigarettes. Those who owned houses outright survived the hyperinflation because the rent replaced their salary. What was the outcome? Well, property became a survival tool. The cash economy completely evaporated. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Our modern dollars today are walking that very same path. And since the 1970s, the US dollar has lost 88% of its purchasing power, and the Canadian dollar, 87%. A $100,000 home in 1970 now costs $900,000. And not because the house is $800,000 better, but because your money lost its value. That's the silent collapse that's already underway. The same playbook. And it leaves one question. If the dollar's trust is eroding, where can you put your faith? If you look specifically at Canada, the average home price has risen over 500% since the year 2000, but wages have barely even doubled. That's not prosperity, not even close. That's monetary inflation flowing into an asset bubble. It's terrifying. When you print too much money, it doesn't lift all boats, it just makes the ocean deeper. Those closest to the printers, they rise first, but everybody else tends to drown. It's another fancy way of paralleling the Cantillon effect. That's that the rich get richer because they're the ones who get the new money first. They then enter into the market before prices have risen and take advantage of all of that new money at cheap rates. They collect all the hard assets and then they rise in price. Whatever money is left over filters through the economy, and those at the bottom of the economy, by the time the money enters their pockets, they've seen real prices increase, meaning they now have less purchasing power than when it first started. And that's why investors run to hard assets that the governments cannot conjure out of thin air. Things like land, gold, energy, Bitcoin, livestock. Real estate has become the middle-class version of gold. It's a physical store of value in a world of digital keystroke printing promises. When inflation spikes, interest rates also follow, crushing affordability and halting credit. That's where we're at right now. So you get this paradox then. The money printing that inflated your home's price is the same force that can later make it unsellable. That's why in every inflation cycle, real estate starts as a winner but ends in a shakeout. Yet through all of it, the land will remain there. It's the constant in the chaos. You can't print more soil. You can't digitally produce shelter. That's why through every collapse in history, from Rome to the Weimar Republic to Argentina, those who owned real estate assets typically survived. And now, as modern currencies not so quietly lose their purchasing power year after year, the same pattern appears to be unfolding again. So if we can't stop the printing then, how do we protect ourselves from it? You need to stop thinking in terms of dollars and start thinking in terms of value. Your dollars are a tool. They are not the value. Ask yourself, if the currency vanished tomorrow, what do I have that people would still need? Step 2. Own productive hard assets, not just speculative ones. Things that generate cash flow or generate an output, a measurable output. Rentals, farmland, energy, skill sets, all those kinds of things. Step 3, you need to lock in your debt. Go fixed, not variable. Lock in long-term rates so you have an understanding of where that's going into the future. Avoid leverage tied to short-term resets. Inflation will erode fixed debt, but it destroys variable borrowers. Step 4, keep some liquidity outside of the banking system. This is perhaps truer now than it's ever been. Things like precious metals, gold, silver, Bitcoin, or even small stashes of foreign currency to act as circuit breakers in the system. It gives you optionality. These things are a vote outside of the system that you're currently in, a globally recognized payment settlement solution that your government cannot control. Step 5, you need to invest in trust in your community. When the money fails, your social capital becomes real capital. Every past collapse birthed the reset, a new currency, a new system. Those with tangible assets were able to transition seamlessly, and those who didn't had to start from zero again. The goal isn't to fear a collapse, especially when it feels inevitable and it's happened time and time again. And there are signals, roadmaps all over that are showing you, pointing you that this is potentially coming. The goal here is to front run that decision. You need to build your wealth on things that a printer cannot take away from you, like land, like energy, like skill sets. Trust. Because when the dollar collapses, it's not the end of value, it's the transfer of it. If this helped to open up your eyes and understand how fragile our current money is, hit subscribe. Because understanding what is going to break it is how we will rebuild what comes after it. And I have every feeling that we aren't that far behind, especially when you consider the fact that we're running budgets here in Canada that aren't even made public. That tells you how scary things really are.